What's up, everyone? Welcome to the podcast. Today's guest is Jessica Siles, the Deputy Press Secretary from a great organization called Voters of Tomorrow. Voters of Tomorrow is a Gen Z-led organization that is really out there doing the incredible grassroots work of reaching as many young Gen Z voters as they can and try to engage as many people as possible in this election. So, of course, Jessica is a great guest for us to have on. She actually was also a member of our advisory committee, so she was part of our research project. She helped inform the questions that we asked the focus group, and so she's been there all along, giving us her advice and lending us her expertise. We are happy to have her on the podcast today to hear her reactions, to get some of her thoughts on how this research project has helped inform the way Voters of Tomorrow is going to speak to the people that they're trying to reach out to, and she provides a little bit of advice to other organizations out there on what they should do to best reach young voters. So let's, without further ado, let's take a listen, and here's Jessica. All right. Well, Jessica, thank you for joining us today. We're excited to hear from you. First, just tell everyone watching, who are you? What's Voters of Tomorrow for folks that may not know? Just give us a little intro.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. I'm Jessica from Voters of Tomorrow. Our organization really just tries to empower and engage young people at really all different levels of campaigns and government. We do stuff super hyper locally, stuff nationally, stuff from getting people to just vote, and then also taking it a step further and getting people really engaged, volunteering, showing up at events, up and down the ballot. Me personally, I was born and raised in Florida, and that has shaped a lot of my political viewpoints and made me who I am. But just recently I moved to New York City, so that's been a very different adventure. But still finding new ways every day to become more involved myself and learning as I go.
And I know you mentioned Florida is your sort of epicenter for your political awakening or whatever it is you want to, but can you tell me just a little bit more about that? Was there specific issues? Was there a thing in Florida that occurred, or just tell me a little bit about why you decided to sort of get involved?
Yeah, I mean, totally. Lots there. So I think, I was pretty young when Donald Trump won the election, and I couldn't vote in that election. And I remember thinking to myself, Roe v. Wade is going to be overturned. And, I think everyone kind of thought you're being a little dramatic. But I think I, even very young, knew the stakes of that were very high. And so I think that was a wake-up call for me. But also growing up, my dad is an immigrant and my mom is a public school teacher. And wow, both of those things in Florida, don't always feel like the safest identities. So I think that was something that was always kind of, framing my own life and identity as well. And then, I grew up just a couple miles away from the Pulse shooting that happened in Orlando. And then also when Marjorie Stoneman Douglas happened, I was also in high school. So just, I guess, a lot of things kind of at once building upon each other kind of just brought me to be more and more involved and recognizing the intersections of each of those issues I cared about, just got me further and further interested. And here I am.
And we're going to dive into the research in a second, but I feel like we're just sort of flowing down because I think your experience is very, sort of related to kind of what we heard, right? And all the stew that's in there, all the stuff that's in the stew of how young people and even people my age, millennials, feel about stuff. So I'm just curious, even more from your perspective, when you think about institutions or when you think about where the country's going, how do you personally feel? I know we're going to talk a bit about how the folks we talked to felt, but I'm just curious about do you find yourself to be more optimistic than your peers, or where do you kind of come from?
I love the phrase cautious optimism. I think that's definitely what I feel, especially lately. I totally understand some of the, not optimism. But when I see my peers getting more involved like I did, and when I see things like Florida putting abortion on the ballot, I see how we can move forward still and make it even better than it was before on all sorts of different issues in all sorts of different ways. I see more talk about things like this, things like inclusivity and diversity. And so I personally feel cautiously optimistic most times.
And before we dive into the research, my last question, just on the general side, is like, what do you want my generation or my mom's generation, like, what do you want us to just like know about your peers and your group? Is there like a thing something you want to dispel that you think is commonly understood, or just like, what would you want to know folks to know from I'm an older millennial.
Well, I think this is a good segue into the research. I think, one of my big takeaways is we're really just trying to grow up. We're trying to maybe someday own a house. Maybe, I think there's this thought in a lot of people's minds that the younger generations are just super naive and want these things that are, so out there. But really, a lot of it is very grounded in just wanting a community and a family and a safe and happy life that I think is shared across generations. So I think just, taking a moment, whether you're thinking about Gen Z or talking to Gen Z, and just kind of like realizing like, a lot of us are adults now. A lot of us really just want the same things. That might look a tiny bit different for us.
And so you transitioned us to the research that we did, our focus group. So I'm just curious from your perspective, what surprised you? What did you find was like super notable? Were those the same thing? Or if they're different, they could be different. But yeah, I'm just curious on your reactions.
Well, a lot of it, I will say, I think didn't shock me, because I think a lot of it was, again, kind of grounded, kind of like what we all want. But that kind of alongside that, it is a little surprising sometimes seeing just how similar some of our concerns and our wants are. People on both sides of the spectrum and people with all different kinds of answers throughout the poll really said the things that they're concerned about are, feeling like a system is not working for them, or feeling like they are not having these opportunities that were once super accessible. And I think that is just a really shared feeling. And anytime that can be articulated and, demonstrated how shared that feeling is I think just eye-opening to me.
And on that note, like either in your experience, I guess in your experience, because you can't speak for the people that were on the focus group, like where do you find, either from talking to your friends or just your lived experience, like the kind of like failure of the institutions, or like where does the cynicism kind of creep in from your, like, do you have experience either with whatever it is, like where do you think it kind of comes from with your generation? I know where it comes from with my generation, but it's probably a little different for everyone, right?
Yeah. Well, I think it is different for everyone. I will definitely start by saying that. And I think part of it is honestly Donald Trump. I think, a perfect example is Roe v. Wade, and some of the abortion rights we had as children have now been taken away from us. And so how can you not feel like the system is broken when you have in your eyes these good things being rolled back? But alongside with that, I mean, our generation has lived through, I think, some unique experiences. When I think about like the climate crisis, I think our generation has seen the impacts of that at a much different scale, on a much different timeline. And then also, again, just growing up, doing certain types of school drills in case an active shooter comes. That is not an experience that my parents or grandparents grew up with in their schools. So I think amongst young people in particular, there are these unique shared experiences that don't always leave the most positive mood in your mind. And so I think that is really...
I mean, my generation, I'm an older millennial, so I'm 38. We didn't grow up with school shooting drills. we didn't have those. So, I mean, this is like so unique to you. I was in 8th grade when Columbine happened, and I just remember how crazy that was and how we were like, oh, there's no way that's going to happen. I mean, just like how much we thought that would change. And obviously, it well, it didn't. We don't have to, hash that out. We know it didn't change. So yeah, I can only imagine kind of growing up under that cloud from kindergarten on had to be is certainly something that would leave an impact. So a lot of like what we've talked about in other things, and just I think there's a general conversation out there about like how much anti-Trump messaging versus pro-Biden messaging should there be, right? Like, and I think when you think about like, especially the swing voters we talk to, like they're double negatives. Like they weren't, this wasn't flowers for anybody. And so I'm just curious from your perspective, like for those voters, folks, like how much Biden messaging has to occur versus how much is it driving up Trump's negatives? Like, where do you sort of stand on that?
Well, I think what Gen Z has a really good handle on is being able to fish out authenticity. And I think that's what sometimes it comes down to. And I know we'll talk about this later, but the messenger and trust. And so I think content that feels authentic, that they're talking about a candidate because of day-to-day experiences they've had, policy that's directly impacted their day-to-day life, that is more authentic. And I think that translates a lot better than when it feels like a campaign ad. And I think growing up on the internet, Gen Z can usually deter pretty quickly whether something, is some sort of targeted ad or someone really speaking their truth on something or someone.
You transitioned just a little bit, but let's talk directly about, sort of the messenger being more important than the message in many ways. So tell me your perspective on that, sort of how do you feel about that, and who are the right messengers and how should they be showing up?
I mean, yeah, I think this got it exactly right. I do think that the messengers are, sometimes more important than the message. And I think that's because Gen Z really values authenticity and trust. And a lot of times that manifests in our peers. I think our peers, we talked about some of those shared experiences. They know that at least in some ways, we're looking at things the same way. We kind of need the same things in a lot of ways. So something at Voters of Tomorrow that we're doing is we're making sure we contact all of our friends, all of our classmates, all of our cousins. We're very heavy pushing, peer-to-peer relational organizing. Because again, that there's at least some level of trust in having some of the same shared experiences. And some of those things are guiding, collectively our thought processes. And so I think that's really important.
Awesome. So my last question is the big one. How do you reach Gen Z swing voters? What's your advice out there for individuals or even maybe more importantly, other organizations that want to do this?
Yeah, I mean, I think something we've talked a lot about is just being honest and transparent and authentic and just telling your truth of why you feel a certain way. For example, when I'm talking to my peers about why I'm going to vote for Joe Biden in November, it's coming from an honest place that we can have that conversation and I can point to things that I feel like have impacted my day-to-day life. And I think that's just so much more relatable and effective than trying to talk about things in conversations or in ways that are not as tangible, if that makes sense. Just person to person, peer to peer, tell your side of things. That seems really simple, but it's something we don't always do. And with that being said, face-to-face conversations, I feel like are always, the best place to have nuanced discussions and really get into it. But I think that totally can translate, as we've learned, to social media as well. You can speak honestly and authentically to a camera and, keep things to that. And that is also an effective way, whether that looks like a testimonial or whether that's in your own different style. I think that's going to take you far in swing states and just in general.
Awesome. And then the last thing is just how can folks learn more about Voters of Tomorrow, learn more about you? If you got anything to plug it.
Yeah, no, we are always looking for people to join our chapter networks. If you're Gen Z, if you're not Gen Z, we still are trying to have as many volunteers as possible, all hands on deck. We are texting and calling, and our goal is to make over 20 million voter contacts to young voters before November. So please check out our website, votersoftomorrow.org, and we post our events on our Mobilize page if people are familiar. And come join us, and we will text and talk to young people in hopefully the most authentic and truthful way that we can.
Awesome. Yeah, and if you're watching this either on Substack or YouTube, we'll put links and all that stuff below so you can just click and find all that stuff. Jessica, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. It was great to hear your perspective. And yeah, thanks for everything you've done with us so far.
Thanks so much for having me. Everything has been such a pleasure.